F. Kennedy, Massachusetts Democrat elected to Congress in 1946, son of Joseph P. Kennedy, who served on the Commission of Organization of the Executive Branch of the government. Kennedy had limited duty as naval officer assigned to naval intelligence during the war. It is believed that the information was obtained from a source in Congress who is close to the Secretary of the Air Force. So
that's a pretty dramatic thing.
We find that Kennedy, of all the members of Congress, apparently knew about the reality of the crash at Roswell. But, I guess he went along with everybody else when they said this is national security and we don't want to panic people and we got to keep this under wraps. But then in the early 60s, there's an account from two men at what is now known as Area 51.
51.
Yeah, that said Kennedy was coming to visit, and that some of the German scientists and scientists at Area 51 were a little bit concerned, but not too concerned, because they were laughing and saying, we'll just, like everybody else, we'll tell him there's nothing here. But then later they overheard these same scientists screaming bloody murder because they said Kennedy was threatening to cut their budgets. And I think what happened there is that he went to Area 51, they gave him the usual song and dance about nothing unearthly here, and he knew better because he had been briefed in 1947. And this was further supported by a FBI wiretap in the summer of 1962 that was between a friend of Marilyn Monroe's and the famous journalist Dorothy Kilgallen. And the friend of Marilyn Monroe said Marilyn was very upset, felt like she'd kind of been jilted by the Kennedy brothers, and that she was threatening to hold a news conference and reveal secrets. Well, one of these secrets was missiles in Cuba. Well, this was several months before the Cuban Missile Crisis, and when we all got told about the Soviet missiles in Cuba. But the number one thing she said she was going to tell was how President Kennedy had told her he had visited a secret air base and viewed things from space. That was his trip to Area 51. And then we have a document that's controversial because there's no provenance of where it came from. It was one of these leaked documents. But it shows on November the 12th, 1963, Kennedy sent a memo to the head of Central Intelligence Agency ordering him to turn over all the UFO files to the White House. Well, this would have been tantamount to making it public, since, the White House has got everybody down to interns, and somebody would have blabbed. So, but to add strength to this questionable document is a legitimate document out of the Kennedy Library that shows on that very date, November the 12th, Kennedy was talking about space matters and had written to James Webb, head of NASA at that time, that we were going into joint space exploration with the Soviet Union, and that he wanted him to implement that program. And in the White House memo ordering the head of the CIA to turn over UFO files, his rationale was, he says, because we're going into joint space exploration with the Soviets, and we have to separate the knowns from the unknowns so that they won't take this as some kind of scheme to spy on them. Now, George, I ask you, isn't it a story that in 1963, in the height of the Cold War, we were going to go into joint space exploration with the Russians?
Absolutely bizarre.
Very bizarre, but it's absolutely true, because the son of Nikita Khrushchev came out and said that he was aware of this and verified that Kennedy and Khrushchev had worked out a deal. See, Kennedy was working to try to end the Cold War. The very day he was assassinated, he had sent a French journalist to Cuba with instructions of trying to open a dialogue with Fidel Castro to see if he could normalize relations between the United States and Cuba. And now we find out he was going to go into joint space exploration with Khrushchev.
Jim, let's go back a little bit, and I don't know if you have a lot of knowledge of Cuba and Castro. I was only I was only 9 years old at the time of that revolution. I had always been told that Castro in the United States they were working together.
They absolutely were. George, when I was in high school, how high school boys are, they're gung-ho, the hormones are flowing. Me and my friends, we all talked about going down to Cuba and joining with Fidel Castro to overthrow the evil dictator Batista.
Right.
Okay?
Other than the mob, the mob.
And he was supplied by the CIA. We helped Castro take over in Cuba.
What happened then?
What happened very simply was that they found out he was a nationalist, and he was trying to do what was in the best interest of the Cuban people. He threw the mafia off the island, and he began to nationalize some of the banking institutions down there, along with United Fruit. And all of a sudden, they're going, "Oh my God, this guy's bad for our business."
We backed the wrong guy, right?
Yeah. So what did they do then? They said he's probably a communist. So they passed resolutions, blockaded the island, cut Castro off from the rest of the world, which left him only two choices: dry up, blow away, or deal with the Soviets. Well, he began to deal with the Soviets, and this cry of communist became a self-fulfilling prophecy. See, we told you he was a communist. He's dealing with the Russians. Well, yeah, we forced him into it.
And Che Guevara was working with Castro at the time, wasn't he?
Yes.
Okay.
And he was another just, starry-eyed socialist idealist. They were just they had seen what our form of capitalism had done to their island.
See, I knew that at one time we were helping and supporting him, and then all of a sudden the whole thing flip-flopped.
Exactly. We more or less got him into office, and then when he started doing things that went contrary to the neo-colonial foreign policy that we wanted, then he became anathema, and they turned on him, just like we did Saddam Hussein. He fought that 8-year war with Iran on our behalf. And then the worst thing they've tagged him with was gassing the Kurdish people, but who sold him the gas? We did.
We did.
He was a two-bit, tin-horn dictator, but he was our two-bit, tin-horn dictator until he just he defaulted on his international bank loans, and that's when he became the new Hitler.
Well, same thing with Manuel Noriega in Panama.
Exactly. And it's really funny because drugs fits in there too. Manuel Noriega was simply charging too much corrupt money, and he was clogging up the drug routes. A year after our invasion of Panama, and it was ostensibly we went down there to grab Noriega, who we claimed all of a sudden, even though he was our guy, we put him into office, we armed him, we supplied him, and then all of a sudden we claimed he's a big drug dealer. And we ran down there and we invaded the country and we got him. And yet a year later, according to U.S. News and World Report, there was 3 times more drugs flowing through Panama than when he had been in power.
Oh, I tell you what, though, Jim, the greatest story never told is the fact that he is, I believe, in a federal prison in Marion, Illinois, and nobody, not you, not me, nobody can get to this guy to do an interview with him.
You can't get to him, and in fact, what I think is the greatest travesty of justice in the world was when he was brought up here and put on trial for these drug charges. The federal judge in charge said he could not bring up anything having to do with the U.S. government, which means he couldn't defend himself, saying I was only doing what they told me to do.
Can you imagine the kind of interview he in the names?
Oh, yeah.
That he,
yeah.
oh. Because he was involved in that bank scandal. What was the name of that?
BCCI?
Yeah, that's it. He was part of that, too.
That's right. And who was at the heart of the BCCI bank scandal? The Bush family. It's the same way with the savings and loan. I mean, this is the same old gang. In fact, let me tell you, let's go back. Let me give your listeners a little bit of history. The one thing Richard Nixon did that everybody almost universally gave him good credit for was the fact that he opened diplomatic relations with China. Well, that was not lost on him. So the next thing you know, he makes a trip to Russia. And he comes back talking about, quote, détente. Okay? He was going to reach an agreement with Russia. And he, too, saw his claim to fame in history if he could end the Cold War. But it didn't happen for two reasons. One, he got caught up in Watergate and was forced to resign or face impeachment. And by the way, that would have brought out too many ugly details, such as in the Watergate tapes, if you'll recall, he was always talking about the whole Bay of Pigs thing. In fact, he ended up paying $2 million in hush money to E. Howard Hunt, one of the Watergate burglars, because he said we don't want to break open the whole Bay of Pigs thing. Well,
strangely, Jim, had Watergate not occurred, he would have been perceived as one of the best presidents we ever had.
That is very possibly true.